Whispers from Below, a horror podcast by Justin W. Geis. Scary stories, both real
Hello,
and
listeners. Welcome to Season 4, Episode 1 of Whispers from Below, a podcast by a madman for madmen. I'm your resident psychopath, Justin W. Geis, and today's topic of discussion is Aileen Wuornos. Now, before I get into the episode, I do have a couple things to say. First of all, hello, long time no listen, everybody. I know I took a lot longer off than I have between past seasons. I've been working a lot, really moving up in my job, really loving it, and I've just been super crazy busy with that. So I haven't really had a lot of time to record, but I'm back. I'm excited to start Season 4 with you guys with a serial killer episode, which seems very fitting and true to form for this podcast. This is pretty dark, so for any listeners who are interested in serial killers and stuff, this is perfect for you. If you're a younger listener, this might be a little bit too dark. There's a lot of more adult topics in it. That being said, listen at your own risk. If you ever start to listen and feel uncomfortable, please stop at any time. Not every episode is for every person, and that's totally okay. Now, moving on. So let's get started with the episode. So Aileen Wuornos is a female serial killer. She killed 7 men in Florida from 1989 to 1990. She claimed that it was self-defense, and that each of the men had tried to rape or hurt her while she was prostituting, which is kind of a likely story. It's very possible, but it's not probable. Does that make sense? Maybe I'm wording that wrong. It's possible that that's how every situation was, but judging by her and how she's acted in the past, it's probably not what actually happened. She was born Aileen Carol Pittman in Rochester, Michigan, which I didn't even know existed. She was born on February 29th, 1956. And 2 months before Aileen was born, her parents filed for divorce, which is why she took her mother's maiden name, which was Wuornos, instead of her father's name, Pittman. She never really met her father. He was in jail by the time she was born. Her father was schizophrenic, convicted of molesting children, and Wuornos' mother abandoned the children when she was only 4 years old, left them with their maternal grandparents. She also had a brother, I believe an older brother. It just said brother everywhere I looked. It never said older or younger. So I'm really unclear. But as you can see, her childhood was rough. I mean, she had a schizophrenic father. He was molesting children. She never got to meet him. He was already in jail. Then her mom goes kind of crazy and leaves the kids with the grandparents. Lori and Britta, I don't know what I wrote there. Lori and blank Wuornos were alcoholics who legally adopted Aileen and her brother Keith in 1960. By the age of 11, Wuornos was doing sexual things in exchange for cigarettes, drugs, and food at school. And she even had some fooling around situations with her brother, which is super incesty and weird. She claimed that her grandpa would sexually assault her and beat her, and before he would beat her, he would force her to strip naked, and then he would do the beating and the sexual assault. So just a lot of messed up things happening in her life. She's trying to figure out how to cope, and she's realizing that she can use sex to sort of get what she wants, but she's only 11. It's a really, really sad story when you actually look at it and think about it. It's pretty depressing, honestly. She was pregnant at 14 because she got raped by a friend of her grandfather's. She gave birth to her child at a home for unwed mothers. The child was born on March 23rd, 1971, and it was placed up for adoption. She ended up dropping out of school very quickly after that, and then soon got kicked out by her grandfather. Her grandmother died of liver failure, and she began prostituting at 15 to support herself, and she was living in the woods near the family home that she grew up in. So by 15, she's pretty much whoring around as her form of business. That's how she's making money. That's how she's doing her thing. And unfortunately, I don't want to say that this happens like frequently, like it obviously doesn't, but had this not happened to her, we might be in a different situation. We might not have 7 men that had died to her. You know what I mean? Like if she had just been taken care of as a kid. So I'm not saying that this sort of like allows her to do whatever she wants. Like obviously she did terrible things and needs to be punished for those things that she did. She did them regardless. That's my point of view on things, at least. But I do think that like you have to take into account the childhood trauma and the other things that happen prior to those crimes, to sort of get the full picture of like how and why this came about, if that makes sense. I don't know. I never like to look at anybody as a monster. There's always a reasoning behind things that people do. Even if it's a really like fucked up one, even if it's a really, really fucked up reason, there is a reason behind it. And you can't necessarily judge a person for compulsions that they can't control or that they didn't know that they had until it was too late. So I don't ever like to say that she's a monster, although we'll talk about it later, but there's literally a movie titled Monster that's about her, which I just think is like kind of awful, especially because like she's not, we'll get into it later, but she's not one of the worst serial killers ever. Like, what about Bundy, who murdered like 30 plus people? Same with Gacy. You know, Dahmer literally 8 people. And then, like, why is she monster and they're not? Like, anyway, we'll get into that in a second. It's a whole thing about feminism that we'll talk about. It's going to be wonderful. But anyway, so she got arrested at 18. This is like her first big arrest for a DUI. She ended up hitchhiking to Florida, where she met 69-year-old Louis Gratz Fell. Sorry. He was a very, very rich man who married a young prostitute. They got married very quickly, and then she went to jail briefly for assault. Hit Fell with his own cane, and he got a restraining order. So she ended up like basically beating up an old man with a cane that she was like married to. She like brutally beat him up. And then he was like, restraining order, done with that marriage. And she was like, what do you mean, baby? I love you. And he was like, I don't know about that. So then she threw a cue ball at a bartender's head. Her brother died, and she ended up getting $10,000 in life insurance. She wasted every single cent of it. And she paid a fine that she got for drunk driving. She started getting into car theft, prostitution, armed robbery. Overall, just a pretty, like, bad woman. Like, just someone that's kind of seedy that you don't really want to be around. There's no real reason for you to be around them. I mean, she started getting into, like, armed robbery. Really just, like, dangerous activity that is not ideal for anybody to be doing, let alone being around it at all, you know. That's when she met Tyria Moore around 1986. They met at a lesbian bar and soon moved in together. Wuornos hooked to support them, and she fell head over heels in love with Tyria Moore. Like, claimed to be in love with her up until the point where she was executed. Like, she was in love with her, and there was no ifs, ands, or buts about it. There was no way that she was not in love with her. Like, absolutely 100%. If there's anything you can take away from this as like fully truthful, it was that she loved that woman like through hell and high water. They both got arrested at a bar for assault with a beer bottle. And that's when things sort of took a darker turn. She ended up murdering 7 men within 1 year.
I don't know about you, but I personally hate having to go to the grocery store. It takes up so much of my day when I could be starting a new hobby with that time, like soap carving, or collecting the sick bags out of airplanes. With Instacart, it makes grocery shopping fast and easy, all while allowing me to stay in my underwear. Instacart allows you to order all of the things you usually get from your local stores, delivered to your door in as fast as 1 hour. Not only that, but it will also give you smart suggestions for new items based off of your preferences, as well as highlight deals to help you save some money. The shoppers handpick perfect produce and make sure that your eggs get to you safely. You can get free delivery on your first order over $35 by following the link in the show notes. This also lets Instacart know that we sent you, and it helps support Whispers from Below. So if you hate grocery shopping as much as I do, try Instacart today and enjoy getting your groceries the easy way.
Her first victim was Richard Charles Mallory, who was aged 51. He was a convicted rapist and was her very, very, very first victim. She claimed that she was sodomized and then beaten by him. He had been shot several times. He had 2 bullets in his left lung that were the cause of death. All victims were shot, but with different weapons, and then all of those weapons were typically pawned off. She would also pawn off items of the victim, and then she would steal the cars of them that she would then use for a short while before, you guessed it, getting rid of the car for money that she could use to support her and Tyria. So she was sort of using prostitution as a way to lure in these men, and then she was murdering them, taking their things, selling their things, as a way to sort of survive. With her first victim, it's a little bit more believable that maybe she was really like raped and beaten because he's been convicted of that in the past. So it makes it a little bit more like probable that that's what happened. But again, like, it's hard to believe someone like that when they have just killed 7 men. Like, how am I supposed to believe that this awful thing happened to you when you yourself were doing such terrible things to people? Like, it's a very likely story, you know what I mean? But I do think that if the first victim happened that way, that could have been what set her off to be like, hey, wait, I kind of like doing this. I kind of like killing men. Like, I'm going to continue to do it because men have harmed her entire life. They've done her in. Like, she never had a father figure. He was already in prison for molesting people. And it all has to do with sex is the other thing. All of the men in her life have to do with sex. It's just awful. Like, of course she came out fucked up. What do you mean? Anyway. So she would lure in these men as a prostitute and then kill them, like I mentioned before. All the bodies were in different counties, which in this time made it really, really hard to figure out that they were all related kills. It was very difficult to communicate back in the early 90s. And even before then, obviously, it was extremely hard to communicate between counties about like who was what. Like what kill was what thing. It was super difficult to sort of discern whether or not things were connected in any way, whether or not murders were sort of happening at the same time in the same place, if the MO was the same, because they didn't have the technology. Everything was like filed by hand, and so you would have to sort through files to find case files that sort of matched. Unless they happened consistently enough, there wasn't really a great way to notice it. This is like right when like technology was first starting to branch out for the criminal justice system and stuff like that. So it kind of just made it a little bit more difficult. And police departments and stuff didn't have the tech that we have today. There's my little rant on why serial killers were way more popular back then and they're not now. Anyway, so Wuornos and Moore were seen leaving a wrecked car on July 4th, 1990. This is an important person. I know I skipped over a couple people that got murdered. Apologies for their names. But the 4th victim's car is the car that they were seen leaving. They left fingerprints on the car that matched up to some pawned items from the victims. And 2 witnesses on the scene gave descriptions of the women, and a large media campaign started to find them. Because by the 4th victim, they had started to see a pattern. Police departments were starting to communicate between counties. They were starting to realize that maybe we have a killer on our hands, but at this point in time, the idea of a female serial killer was not really like a thing. The only kind of like female serial killer that we have known of before is sort of a Black Widow, which happened a lot frequently. Not frequently even, but like it happened a lot more back in like ye old days where like women would get like life insurance policies from their husbands after they died, pretend to be sad, then take a new husband, repeat the cycle until they got caught. So sort of having like these brutal shootings didn't really match what we considered to be like a female MO. And typically I would say it's not very typical of a female MO from what I understand. The female brain just works differently, and there aren't as many female serial killers as there are male. And especially with like brutal killings like this, it's just not as common. So people were definitely not expecting a woman. So when they got these witness reports of two women, they were like, holy shit, they're female. Like this is something that we hadn't even like considered as an option. So then after they sort of got everything into the system with the fingerprints and whatnot, they arrested her very, very quickly. And then they also found Moore as well. Moore agreed to get a confession from Wuornos as long as she got immunity during the trial. And she called Wuornos multiple times, begging her to just confess in order to save Moore. 3 days later, Wuornos confessed and claimed that that they had all tried to rape her, and that it was completely self-defense, and that she wasn't technically at fault for anything that happened because it was all just self-defense, and she was just trying to, save her own life and save herself from rape and beatings and things like that. This is where the story gets kind of interesting, and normally, if you're a newer listener, I don't normally talk about the trials and stuff because I just don't think that stuff is really interesting to me. I'm more interested in the past, the murders, and then I'm kind of like, oh yeah, they got convicted. Okay, whatever. And I want to know the conviction, but the whole like in-between process, I normally don't talk a lot about unless there's something fascinating about it. So like, I know I keep talking about it, but when I eventually do a Bundy episode, I'm going to do it. It's a big undertaking. When I finally do a Bundy episode, I will talk a lot about the trial because that's what makes him so fascinating. And specifically with Wuornos, she told a lot of like super inconsistent stories about all of the killings during the trial. So she kept telling these stories that just like were not adding up in any way. Like they were all kind of all over the place, and she seemed to be having a hard time like remembering things, and then suddenly she would remember, but it would be completely different from what she described before, and she was just like super inconsistent in what she was talking about, but very she had a lot of conviction with what she was talking about. It just wasn't consistent. A lot of conviction, not a lot of consistency. She claimed that it was self-defense at first, and then she started to claim that of course it was a robbery, like, but I didn't want to leave any witnesses, so I was just robbing them, like, I just wanted their money and their things, but I didn't want to leave any witnesses. And then she would go back and be like, but it was self-defense because he tried to rape me, and so I had to take him out and blah, blah, blah. It was just like a very weird situation. And this was an interesting fact that I wanted to throw in there. She scored a 32 out of 40 on the psychopathy checklist, which is an itemized list of traits. There are 20 traits where you score either 0, 1, or 2. And if you get between a 25 and a 30 or above, depending on, the doctor, you are considered a psychopath. So she scored a 32 out of 40. That gives you any indication of like, no matter what psychiatrist is sort of using this list, she's a psychopath, like to the bone psychopath. She was sentenced to death, and she sort of went completely bonkers, for lack of a better way to put it, in prison. She became extremely paranoid. She thought that everybody was like, she was convinced that everybody was like poisoning her food when she wasn't looking. She was convinced that people were planning on like killing her so that she didn't have the death sentence trial. she became very, very paranoid was the big thing that happened with her. On October 9th, 2002, she was executed. Instead of a last meal, she just chose to have a cup of coffee. Up until this point, again, she admitted to completely being in love with Moore. Just said that she was like the love of her life and she'd do anything for her. That's why she confessed to everything, and she just wanted to keep her safe. And it's very interesting how much she loved women in comparison to how much she hated men. Because we all say all the time, like, oh, I hate men. Men are awful. Like, I'm a big proponent of that. I think all men are awful. Me on the days when I feel like a man included. Like, no one is subject to anything different. However, I wouldn't kill a man yet. And just for her to be like so willing to kill men and then be so loving and kind that she's willing to confess to all these crimes just to save someone. I mean, it's kind of poetic and like romantic, and I don't know. Maybe that's just me and my crazy brain, but like when I was reading all this, I was like, that's so sweet. Like, aw, so sweet. You killed men for me and then admitted to it. Like, thank you so much. But I don't know. I just thought it was like a really interesting dichotomy between the two. Anyway, her last meal was a cup of coffee, and her very last words were extremely confusing. They were, and I quote, "Yes, I would just like to say I'm sailing with the Rock, and I'll be back, like Independence Day with Jesus, June 6th, like the movie. Big mothership and all. I'll be back. I'll be back." End quote. Like, what? What does that even mean? Like, what are you on where that makes any sense to literally anybody but yourself? So it's a very confusing parting last words that people have been trying to sort of decipher for years. There are a couple theories about it, but none of them really stood out to me, so I kind of just left it as is. Feel free to look up those theories about what she meant with her last statements. But I'm sure you've heard at least the name Aileen Wuornos. It's an extremely popular name. There have been countless books, documentaries, TV shows about her. Dan and I just watched one. It was called Very Scary People, which is a wonderful documentary series if you haven't checked it out yet. It's about like the NorCal rapist. It's about John Wayne Gacy, the Manson tribe, just about like anybody that sort of had, Jim Jones, anybody that sort of had power and was crazy. Also, if you haven't yet, go check out my episodes on John Wayne Gacy and Jim Jones. But yeah, any sort of person that held power or was a very scary individual has an episode, and Aileen Wuornos also has an episode. And it was very good, but she has many documentary series, TV shows, books, stuff like that. The most popular thing, I think, is probably Monster, which came out in 2003, starring Charlize Theron as the lovely Aileen Wuornos. And I don't agree with the title of the film. I don't think that is a proper message to send. And I know a lot of people are like, oh, she was a complete monster. Like, let's be real. She only killed 7 people. And I'm not trying to be a dick or like discredit the fact that she murdered anyone at all is not acceptable. But she only killed 7 people. And Bundy murdered like what? 30? Gacy murdered like 30? Candyman, even Candyman, murdered like 36 boys and like raped them and tortured them. And you're gonna tell me that she's the monster? Like, is it just because she's a woman that she's a monster because she killed men? Whereas when men are murdering women or murdering other men, somehow it's not as impactful. I don't know. It just really upsets me. There's something about it. Like when I was reading what she had done, I didn't know anything about her. And so I was kind of expecting that she had killed like 30 men or like 28, 20 to 30 people. And when I read that it was just 7, I was like, why do I hear so much about her then? Maybe because she was crazy and like she had sort of like a weird trial court moment. Maybe that's why. But like, I don't know. There's just there's no reason to call her, of all people, a monster. I don't think that that's fair, especially when she showed so much compassion towards more over men. Like, she's not a monster, like, very clearly. I don't know, that just really upsets me. I'm not a big fan of that. Moving on. There are also a lot of songs about her, including Willem Belli's cover of Jolene by Dolly Parton, but it's called Aileen. So it's like, Aileen, 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 Aileen. You know, if any of you are a Dolly Parton fan, it's that, but it's about Aileen Wuornos being a hooker and then killing people. We love to see it. I actually have that song on a playlist. I love that song. I think it's really funny. So go check it out. She sort of became this example of psychopathy in women. That became sort of like a measure of, like, if you're a woman that kills, are you on a scale of 0 to Aileen? Where are you on the psychopathy traits? Which I just think is really fascinating. She became sort of a staple for psychologists in the future, to sort of use her as a benchmark. I think that that's a pretty successful murder spree if you're used in that sort of way. At least I think so. Much of what her childhood entailed, I think, created the killer, was the last thing I really wanted to touch on. And I mentioned it a couple times already, but I really think that what happened in her childhood made her the way that she was. And had she had a better childhood, she might not have ended up killing anybody. Like, just straight up, I don't think she would have ended up on that path had she not had the childhood and the abuse and the rape and the early pregnancy that she had. She could have turned out to be completely different. So, I don't know. That's my 2 cents. That's pretty much all I have for the episode itself. But really quickly, I just wanted to plug a couple things. So number 1, this is season 4, and I know that it was St. Patrick's Day this past week when I'm recording. I'm actually recording like the day after. And normally I would do a Leprechaun episode, which I started last year. There are like 7 of them. I will be doing Leprechaun next week. There'll be Leprechaun 2 coming out next week. So expect that episode. It's just coming out a week late because I wanted to start the season off with a serial killer being really true to form. The second thing I want to plug is the Patreon. If you haven't checked it out already, there is a Patreon. It is patreon.com/whispersfrombelow. We've got some really cool perks on it for any patrons that want to go and check it out. There's a sticker that you can get like once every like 3 months. There's t-shirts, customized water bottles, courtesy of Sticker Bar Boutique. If you haven't checked them out, they are a fantastic customizable company that is run by my sister-in-law. They are fantastic and absolutely wonderful, and all of their products are really high quality and high grade. There's a Discord chat where you can talk to like-minded people and myself. You get to vote on episodes. It's really cool, so you should go check it out. I didn't quite reach my goal that I wanted to initially when starting the Patreon, so if you guys would help me sort of get to like 25 patrons, that would be like so cool and amazing, because the more that you guys help me, the more content I can pump out. Also, I recently got a new computer, and I want to try to start doing some actual video episodes. Let me know if you have any ideas for that. Some of them might involve me doing makeup, kind of like Bailey, if you guys know who that is. I think it's like Bailey Saren or something like that. She does these videos where she puts on makeup and talks about spooky things. I'll probably do something similar to that, but obviously I don't want to steal any content from another creator. And the other thing I was thinking of doing is some Dead by Daylight gameplay, talking about each killer, how they came to be, who they're based on, stuff like that, and just some fun like let's play gameplay stuff, because that's what I love to watch. So if you guys are interested in anything like that, please let me know. If you guys have any episode ideas and you want to let me know about them, you can let me know through the website, www.whispersfrombelow.com. There is a contact page. There's also episodes that you can download, as well as a merch page. The merch is really cute, really high quality. You should definitely go check it out. Or you can let me know via Instagram, whispers from below. No spaces, no underscores, no capitals, no nothing. You can always send me a DM. I'm Gen Z, so I keep my phone near me like all the time. So I'm always able to sort of answer those. And I love doing episode ideas from you guys. That's one of my favorite things in the entire world. That being said, that's pretty much it. If you're interested in my personal life at all, it's at JUTIN_geese on Instagram, like the animal. And it's just like makeup, my dog. I think the most recent thing I posted was like me dancing in heels. So if you're interested in anything like that, please go check it out. But other than that, remember, Aileen Wuornos is not fully a monster. However, she is a very influential female serial killer. And if you can get vaccinated, looks like there's like something on the horizon, y'all. Like, let's make it there.